You thought a peasant couldn't get rich quick in the Middle Ages? Think again. Picture yourself in 14th century England. You're exhausted, you're overworked, you're stuck in this feudal system that feels like it was designed to keep you in the mud. You've got no control over your future and nothing but the hope that something or anything might change. But what if it actually could? In a world without crypto, without startups, without jack dudes on YouTube teaching you how to get rich quick, how would you break out of the cycle? How would you turn your poverty into profit in a society that's built to hold you in place? That's what we're diving into with this video. Today we're exploring how a medieval peasant, someone with no title, no wealth, no power, could still carve out a path to something more, to change their destiny and get rich. Because while the system was rigid, it wasn't airtight. So make sure to pay attention, because this one isn't just a history lesson, it's a blueprint. Let's start with one of the few institutions in medieval Europe where your background didn't always determine your ceiling, the church. You might have heard of Thomas Becket. His icons often show him with a sword jammed into his skull, which is a pretty clear indicator that things didn't really go that well for him in the end. But before he became a martyr, Becket was just the son of a merchant. He entered the church, he proved himself useful, and he even caught the attention of the young King Henry II, who eventually appointed him Archbishop of Canterbury. That appointment turned out to be pretty controversial. Becket wasn't born into nobility, and his rise through the church was proof that, under the right conditions, someone with a mix of talent and loyalty could actually move up the ranks pretty fast. Unfortunately, Becket took his new job a little too seriously. He started pushing back on Henry's authority and embracing this intense form of personal piety, and that didn't go over well. His political and spiritual ambitions collided, and his story ended with his brains all over the floor of Canterbury Cathedral. Still, his trajectory shows that church positions could offer real upward mobility if you knew how to play the game. A benefice, or a paid church office, came with both steady income and serious influence. If you were smart, loyal, and lucky enough to secure patronage or an education, you could rise pretty quickly. We see this play out in the Peasant letters, a collection of correspondence from a noble English family in the late 15th century. The matriarch, Margaret Paston, wrote that she was particularly anxious about her son Walter, who was now at Oxford being educated for the priesthood, and she hoped to assign him a vacant parish position. The implication here is clear. Church appointments were valuable assets, and families with connections used them strategically. So that's the nobility. What about the peasantry? Becket came from a merchant background, which already gave him a leg up. For someone who was truly poor, the path was much harder, but not impossible. A peasant boy could start as a choirboy or a servant in their local parish. If he showed promise, whether that was intelligence, his discipline, or just standing out in some way, he might be noticed by the local priest, or even better, a wealthy patron, and that was often the turning point. If someone agreed to fund your Latin education, you were in. Latin literacy was essential for advancement in the church, and if you could master it, doors opened for you everywhere. Cathedral schools occasionally recruited bright students from poor families, and some minor orders were more accessible than others. But all of this depended on finding the right sponsor. Patronage was everything. A local lord might fund your education out of genuine piety, or just as a way to feel like he was buying a few more years off of his purgatory sentence. Either way, it was a fragile relationship. A falling out, a political shift, or even just a better candidate coming along could pull the rug out right from under you. Still, if you made it, and if you kept your head down, followed orders, and avoided a Becket-style meltdown, you could actually secure long-term income, a place in society, and the kind of stability most peasants never even dreamed of. But let's say the church doesn't appeal to you. You don't have the connections, Latin makes your head spin, and piety isn't exactly your strong suit. But maybe you can fight. The 100 Years' War, which stretched from 1337 to 1453, created this near constant demand for soldiers. France and England both needed manpower, and while knights got all the fame and glory, it was actually the common foot soldiers and longbowmen who filled the ranks. If you were strong and you were willing to put your life on the line, you could sign up. Longbowmen in particular were valuable after their success at battles like Crécy in 1346. Chronicler Jean Froissart even described them with a mix of admiration and fear, noting how easily they could pierce armor and scatter enemy lines. It sounds pretty metal to me. But the real financial opportunity came after the fighting stopped. You see, mercenaries who weren't paid or weren't paid enough formed bands known as routiers. They looted monasteries, extorted towns, kidnapped noblemen, and demanded ransoms that could fund an entire year's campaign. Froissart described these companies moving in force and seizing control of local economies to dictate terms. Some mercenaries went even further. Sir John Hawkwood, an Englishman fighting in Italy, became the leader of the White Company, an elite unit that negotiated its own terms and operated like a private military firm. Hawkwood earned enough wealth to rival minor nobility, and you didn't even need to be Hawkwood to benefit from this system. If you survived your first campaign and you proved that you were dependable, you could could rise up through the ranks. Sergeant-level mercenaries sometimes managed logistics or negotiated ransoms. The military treatise De Re Militari outlines how spoils were divided by rank. That meant the longer you stayed alive and the more valuable you became, the more you earned. Some mercenaries retired with land, local titles, or enough cash to live comfortably until they died. But of course it was dangerous, a lot of guys didn't make it, others were mutilated or they were captured or they simply vanished. But for those willing to take the risk, soldiering could be a brutal but effective route out of poverty. But let's say you can't fight and you can't read, maybe you have some other skill, brewing, weaving, shoemaking. If so, good news, there's another path for you, the guilds. Medieval guilds functioned as a mix of a trade union and a business network and also a social club. They controlled entry into trades, they regulated quality and pricing, and they provided training, legal support, and protection. If you were a peasant with talent, you could apprentice under a master craftsman. After years of training, usually about 7, you'd become a journeyman, and then with enough experience and money, and after producing your required masterpiece, you could apply for full membership in the guild. Once you were in the guild, the opportunities expanded. Guilds had legal monopolies in many cities. If you weren't in the guild, you couldn't legally sell the product. That meant more security and higher margins for those inside. In cities like Florence, guilds didn't just dominate trades, they actually influenced government. Banking and textile guilds shaped public policy and amassed enormous wealth. One of the most successful merchants of the period, Francesco de Tini of Prato, started modestly and built a business empire spanning from Spain to Constantinople. His surviving ledgers document his rise in staggering detail. But not everyone became a de Tini. Plenty of peasants managed to improve their fortunes through trade. After the Black Death disrupted the feudal system, many left their manors, settled in towns, and entered commerce. Some actually even succeeded, but there were still barriers. Guilds required entry fees, merchants needed capital, and town life had its own challenges. But the payoff was significant. One successful shipment of cloth or spices could make more money than years of farm work. Real quick, my YouTube analytics tell me that nobody watches my videos past the 4-minute mark, so if you're still here, shout out to you. Thank you for being a real medieval mindset fan. Anyway, back to the video. So was it common for a medieval peasant to get rich? No. Was it easy? Not even remotely. But was it possible for a peasant in the Middle Ages to rise above the station they were born into? Absolutely. The feudal system was rigid, I'm not arguing that, but it wasn't sealed shut. There were openings through the church, the battlefield, or the marketplace. If you were sharp and lucky and maybe charismatic and relentless enough to find those cracks, you could step through and change your life. So the next time someone tells you that medieval life was just mud, plague, and misery, tell them about the merchant who built a trade empire, the soldier who retired with land, or the peasant boy who rose through the church to stand beside kings. Feudalism may be dead, but some medieval peasants still found a way to get richer than you. Anyway, I'm John and this has been Medieval Mindset. If you like what you saw today, make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, the past is not gone, it's simply waiting to be rediscovered.